Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the team Calcutta Comparatists 1919, I take this privilege to warmly welcome you to the lecture of the lecture series. Calcutta Comparatists 1919 is an independent forum for research scholars of humanities and social sciences. It carries the legacy of academic study of Indian languages and literatures, envisioned by Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee and introduced in 1919 at the University of Calcutta. Later in 2005, a new department was established which still continues to carry research in Indian languages. Calcutta Comparatives 1990 took inspiration from this history, and it is a platform for sharing research interest and ideas. We are organizing online lectures on various interdisciplinary topics to be delivered by academicians and distinguished research scholars of different fields. Your remarkable skills will be a great addition to our team. We look forward to a mutually beneficial relationship with you. Thank you all for joining us today. I'll now request one of our founder members, Jemima Nasreen, to introduce our speaker of the day. Jemima, over to you.
Thank you, Araftrikadi. Today we have with us Professor Anindya Sekhar Purakayastha. Dr. Anindya Sekhar Purakayastha is a professor at the Department of English in Kazi Nazrul University. He has been a fellow at the Institute of Critical Social Inquiry, New School for Social Research, New York in June 2017, and a Fulbright Nehru Academic and Professional Excellence Fellow at the Departments of Massachusetts, USA from 2018-19. He was also the recipient of US Department of State sponsored exchange grant for academic and research visit for the Center for Commonwealth Studies, University of Louisville, USA, and SUISS scholarship in the University of Edinburgh, UK in 2005. Professor Purakayastha is currently functioning as director and project leader in the major research project funded completely by ICSSR. Dr. Purakayastha is an accomplished scholar in the fields of critical theory and contemporary political turns, new xenophobia, social justice and global solidarity, post-colonial governance, human rights, history of nations and violence, subaltern studies and social exclusion, Dalit literature, etc. He is widely published both nationally and internationally. He has authored and co-authored many books and articles in internationally reputed journals. To name a few, Cultures of Violence in South Asia, Contemporary Perspectives, Literature, Cultural Politics and Counter Readings, Hamlet as the Prince of Deconstruction, Different Americas, Resituating American Identity in the Post 9/11 Third Worldian Classroom, etc. Dr. Purakayastha is a member of editorial board of the literary and cultural journal Café des Census and of journals such as Apollonian and Postcolonial Interventions. He also co-edits Carios, the Journal of Critical Symposium, and a founding member of Postcolonial Studies Association of the Global South. Today, Professor Purakayastha will be talking about DuBois's The Negro Church and Ambedkar's The Buddha and His Dhamma, Heterodoxies of Liberation Theology. We are honored, sir, to have you with us today. Now this virtual stage is yours. You may start your lecture. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot for this long and kind introduction. And I thank also everyone connected to this particular group. As I can see, this is populated with young scholars, which is really a very encouraging sight. And once again, I extend my heartfelt thanks to all the members connected to Calcutta Comparatists for inviting me. What I feel more good about today's talk is that this is a subject on which I have been thinking of doing more work since 2018, but I couldn't materialize to work further on it because of various other preoccupations and engagements. But I think through today's talk, I can share some of my studies and thoughts involving two towering individuals. One happens to be, as we can see from the title itself, B.R. Ambedkar from India, and the other William Booker William Edward Booker DuBois. Now, they were located in two different continents, one from America, the other one from India. They didn't meet each other. They didn't have the fortune to meet each other physically, but they did correspond with each other. It was part of my Fulbright research in the University of Massachusetts in 2018 and 19 to work in the DuBois archives there in the UMass, where the library itself in University of Massachusetts is named after DuBois. So the library in UMass is called W.E.B. DuBois Library. And they have an archive there. They have a center named after DuBois also. DuBois was born in Massachusetts, the place was called Great Barrington. And there are similarities or commonalities between Ambedkar and DuBois, large areas of commonalities to be precise. DuBois was the first African American to get a PhD degree from Harvard, and Ambedkar was the first Dalit to get a degree from Columbia University. Both of them were highly educated, activists, scholarly activists, constitutionalists, Democrats, and last but not the least, sociologists, in the sense that they were first-rate social thinkers. They engaged with issues that we generally do not look into. I have seen sociologists expressing wonders as to how that Indian sociologist ignored Ambedkar for a long time in their engagement with caste and other issues related to caste and social hierarchies and discrimination. After a long time, even post-colonial thinkers took a lot of time to come to terms with Ambedkar's works. You had to create a separate discipline called Dalit studies, which is distinct from post-colonial studies, although we keep it as a kind of a subset or a member within the larger family of post-colonial studies. But scholars have expressed their reservation and anguish. For example, Rathore and the co-editor of Verma, Ajay Verma and Akash Singh Rathore, who were the editors of the critical edition of the Buddha and his Dhamma, they have expressed their reservation and anguish over the fact that post-colonial scholars have ignored and have almost overlooked Ambedkar for a long time. Similar is the case with DuBois. I myself opted for American studies during my postgraduate days when I was a student in the University of North Bengal. I remember we studied Thoreau, we studied Emerson, we studied Langston Hughes, but I didn't know about DuBois at that time during my PG days as a student. It was only later that I came to realize the importance of DuBois and his towering scholarship on the question of African American plight, segregations. In fact, I came to know about that famous line that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. That's the famous line from that magnum opus of DuBois, The Souls of Black Folk. That line is quoted by many scholars, various literatures we come across this particular expression, but this was actually the line of DuBois. And I realize my scholarly deficiency in DuBois studies after I passed out and moved into the academic world. So it's really a pity that although we talk about post-coloniality, we talk about ethnic studies, conflict, racism studies, but we do not pay much attention to great scholarly figures like DuBois. Now, realizing the importance of DuBois, when I started to read about him, then I also realized the comparative frame, and this is interestingly the talk organized by the comparatist, the Calcutta Comparatists. So I felt that it would be a good idea if we can talk about both Ambedkar and DuBois in a comparatist frame and put them together on the table to think and to understand the commonalities, the shared horizons, the convergences as well as the divergences. But the convergences are many. Although we understand that caste and racial segregations are not exactly the same, but there are common areas, shared areas of pain and agony. So they can definitely be studied together. And it's not a coincidence that Ambedkar wrote to DuBois. The letters of Ambedkar to DuBois are available in the internet. He wrote 2 letters. DuBois wrote back to him. Ambedkar was a student of Columbia University, and at that time he must have been aware about the great movements going on in America at that time, organized by different organizations, especially the organization called the National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People. Now, DuBois was one of the founding members of that association. And there were various others connected to different other movements. DuBois, for example, was another architect of another great movement called the Niagara movement. So all these different mobilizations in the early part of 20th century in America going on at that time when Ambedkar was a student in Columbia in the early 1970s, 1980s at that time. So he must have been aware about the social mobilizations pivoting around the question of the color line, the African American agony, the question of racial discriminations, segregations, the American South versus the American North. We know that the American South was heavily populated with the African American population, and so many things were going on. The Harlem Renaissance came later. We study Langston Hughes in American studies, but very few of us know that the first poem of Langston Hughes was published in the magazine called The Crisis, which was founded by DuBois himself. In fact, it was DuBois who invited Langston Hughes to write and to contribute in that particular magazine. So the history of American literature is integrally connected to the endeavors, the efforts, the mobilizations, and all the other works done and organized by DuBois. So he's a great figure whenever we talk about American studies, we talk about post-colonial studies, or African American studies, or ethnic studies, racism studies, whatever, radical political theological studies, because today's talk is going to focus on this particular aspect of it. So I'll come to that, but this much of introduction is necessary. That you know. DuBois's concern and early realization about the trauma and the agonized persecution of the African American is quite early detected by him, and he captured that, articulated that in that famous book that I mentioned moments back, The Souls of Black Folk, which was published in 1903. Incidentally, even the Negro charts, the text, was also published in 1903. Now, there is a history to this text called the Negro chart. I could see a yellowish, faded copy of the manuscript of the Negro chart in the UMass archive, and it was not quite readable. I had to use the magnifying glass. Although the UMass officials have prepared an electronic copy, but even the electronic copy is not that good in terms of quality and readability. But there is a new edition of the Negro Church, and that is available in the market. But the history of the text called the Negro Church is necessary for all of us to know. And then I will come to Ambedkar's Buddha and his Dhamma and the history behind that as well. Now, when you look into the term, the Negro chart, we understand that at that time, even DuBois used the term quote unquote Negro, but this is no longer in use. In fact, we should not use the term. This is highly objectionable in terms of its user, because it's pejorative and humiliating to the entire African American community. But if we look into the writings of DuBois at that time, then we see that it was customary at that time to use the term, although they brought it to our attention that this is the term loaded with hatred, prejudices, segregational logic, etc. Now, DuBois worked in the Atlanta University, and this is also something very important. Ambedkar, remember, even though he was so well educated, didn't get any university job. DuBois, being the first degree holder among the African American population across America, the first person to do so, didn't get a job or a professorship in any first-ranking, so-called first-ranking American university. He went to Germany to do his research after his studies at after his studies at Harvard, and quite interestingly, he also attended the classes of Max Weber himself, the sociologist. And DuBois's days in Germany was very productive in the sense that he acquired his skill for sociological analysis, his training for sociological analysis, to be precise, was acquired during his time in Germany. But he could not complete his studies in Germany because his scholarship finished and he could not renew his scholarship. He had to get back to America. That's a very unfortunate part of DuBois's stay at Germany. We never know had he completed his research degrees in Germany. He was in the Humboldt University. Even today, there is a center of DuBois studies in Humboldt University. So he left Germany, got back to America, and then got his degrees from Harvard once again, but didn't get any job, as I said, any teaching job in any of the front-ranking universities. The universities where he lectured and he acted as a professor are not that well known. I'll mention. First, he joined Wilberforce University, not that well known. Then he also worked for some time in Fisk University. This is the university where he himself studied as well. Now, he did work for a brief period of time in the University of Pennsylvania, and during that time, he wrote that great book called The Philadelphia Negro, and it is said that this is the first book of sociology in America, and this is the first sociological study on African American life. It got a lot of appreciation across the board in America at that time. So DuBois was highly skilled and trained in social analysis, in collecting data, empirical survey, deriving different conclusions on the basis of those, social empirical data. And his quasi-scientific analysis earned him a lot of accolade and appreciation, and he could prove his points through all those social analysis and empirical and ethnographic studies that he carried out meticulously. I have seen his meticulous, storage of data that he collected from different schools, colleges, churches, um, social organizations of African American people, something that Ambedkar also did in India. Now, as I said some moments back, that Ambedkar wrote to him, knowing fully well the stature that he DuBois held at that time among the African Americans, and the leading role, the vanguardist role that DuBois played for the African American liberation, and the key and crucial contribution that DuBois made to take the entire community forward, something that Ambedkar did for the Dalits here. So the conversation continued in that way, although they never met each other. I could not find any in that way empirical record or proof to suggest that Ambedkar referred to DuBois's works in any of his writings. I couldn't get any such proof till now, but it is quite obvious from the letter that Ambedkar wrote to DuBois that Ambedkar was aware about his place and his position and the role that he played, and the position that he adopted for the emancipation of the entire African American community. Now, having talked about the similarities and the history behind the two, let me now go straight away to the question of religion. I talked about the sociological part. I also spoke about their leading social position and role that both of them adopted for their own community, for the emancipation and liberation of their own community or the individual community. Then let us come to the question of religion, how religion figured in this whole struggle of African American liberation and the struggle of the Dalits for their liberation from the stranglehold of Brahminical domination. Now, if white supremacy is something that was articulated in the form of white Christianity, the white church is looked at by the African Americans with a sense of contempt. Yes, I'm consciously saying that, and also with a sense of disgust and anguish, and there are reasons for it. DuBois once wrote that if Jesus comes to Georgia, and this is the Georgia that we listened to when the US election counting was going on. Atlanta happens to be in the state of Georgia, where DuBois worked. Now, I was saying that DuBois didn't get any job in any of the front-ranking universities in America. He worked all through his entire teaching career. The major portion of his entire teaching career was spent in the Atlanta University. Today, that university has been renamed as the Clark Atlanta University. It is situated in Georgia, in the Atlanta city itself. If you go there, the bust of DuBois is still there within the campus. Now, the reason I'm focusing on this particular point is obvious. Both Ambedkar and DuBois, in spite of being so highly educated, didn't get enfolded within the higher echelons of academia, proving the fact that how the so-called prestigious institutions are either uh, uh, racially blind and discriminatory to the African Americans, and similarly how Indian institutions were also prejudiced against people like Ambedkar, even though Ambedkar was such a highly educated person. We all know the story or those anecdotes that how Ambedkar didn't get rented houses in some good places in Bombay when he expressed his own identity as being a Dalit. Now, coming back, so DuBois spent his entire teaching career in Atlanta University, and it is there, and that's very significant. It is there that he organized every year the annual Atlanta conferences. And in all those annual Atlanta conferences, he did something remarkable in the sense that um, he devoted each and every annual conference of the Atlanta Annual Conference to a particular theme connected to the African American community. One of the annual conferences uh, was connected to the question of African American religion, specifically the condition and the history and the role and the function of the Negro Church as far as the liberation of the African American community is concerned. In other words, how do we look into the contribution and the function of the Negro Church, quote unquote, or the African American Church, the Black Church, uh, for the emancipation of the African American community. That was the primary objective and focus of that particular annual conference. And this particular text called the Negro Chart was a product of that annual conference. If you look into the contents of that particular text, you see that DuBois first explains and justifies the necessity of the Negro Church. In other words, if we are talking about the church, if we are talking about Christianity, then how do we segregate and differentiate between the white church and the Negro church, the white church and the black church? Now, anyone having an experience of going to America and looking into the external architecture of an African American church and the external architecture of the so-called white congregational church will easily understand the differences, the distinctions in terms of the architectural pattern, the gorgeousness, the stature, and also the glitter, the glamour, etc. You can see that most of the African American churches will hold that placard of Black Lives Matter now, today. Now, it's not a sudden emanation in that way. It's not a fact that African American churches are holding that placard for today. There is a long history behind that. In other words, the African American church, according to DuBois, played a crucial role in the upliftment of the African American community. In fact, not only did they do that, they also played another role, which, according to DuBois, happens to be the role of a savior, the role of a consoler, and the role of the preserver. Why? I'll explain that. If we read the text, then we see that DuBois first narrates the history, that how Africans were, shackled, were forced to board the ship, the slave ship, and then they were huddled together. We all know this history. I'm not going to narrate that once again. So then they would be taken to the African South, Texas, Florida, and the Kentucky, other states, notorious. I mean, Carolina. Even today, if you go to South Carolina, you can see relics of slave houses. So today, when we talk about these fascinating sounding names, Carolina, North Carolina, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hills, etc., etc., it sounds so fascinating, and then we may forget, or we tend to forget, the bloody history of slavery of the African South. If we read DuBois's another important work called the Black Reconstruction, then we see that he narrates how the slaves, the former slaves, when they were liberated by Lincoln and others. They migrated from the south to the north. It was a great migration. They came to the north in search of better livelihoods, because most of them were doing plantation works, forceful plantation works as slaves in the American South. So Georgia was also was working there first as a school teacher, then as a university lecturer. So in the text, the Negro Church, DuBois justifies got disconnected because of the internet trouble. So am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Okay, thank you. So what I do, I take the video off. That will improve the audio quality, I guess. Is it okay if
Yes,
I
sir.
take the video off?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No issues.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. So I was talking about the history of the Negro Church and how Du Bois explained the history and justified the importance uh, and the functional logic of the African church, African American church, in the lives of the Black community. Um, as I was talking about the history of slavery, that the African American population would be forced to board the slave ships, and then they will be auctioned to the American South, and then they will be sent to different places as slaves. At that time, they were uprooted from their ancestral places, their native places of Africa. They're completely uprooted forcefully. So they were erased of their history, their cultural roots, their family bonding, everything. So they were lost in every sense of the term, and they were completely disconnected with their motherland, with their cultural moorings and anchorages. And at that particular time of total dislocation and disconnectedness, the only institution that helped them to preserve their cultural root, to preserve their religious root, was the African American church, or in other words, the Negro church. So, if we read Du Bois's text, then we see that he describes that how even elements of sorcery, mumbo jumbo, and other mythological practices of Africa were transplanted into within the Christian paraphernalia, and how it was completely different from the white supremacist churches or white practices of white Christianity. In fact, as I said moments back, that Du Bois justified the existence of the Negro church because they could not identify with the rituals, with the attitudes, with the ideologies of white Christianity. Even today, if you go to African Heritage Studies Association annual conferences, for example, the 2018 African Heritage Studies Association annual conference was held at the Atlanta University, and they began the conference with a visit to the Black Madonna Shrine. So if we go to that church, you'll see that the Madonna there is completely black. So we understand that how the quote unquote the Negro church or the African American church um, transplanted their uh, old and their native and their original religious practices within the structures of Christianity, because they could not perpetuate, or they could not continue their religious practices in that same structure within the location of America. They had to go for some modulations. So they did that. They adjusted, readjusted, molded, remolded, and this is how the history of the Negro Church moved and evolved. And initially, there were problems. Initially, there were problems to adjust with the new situation. White Christian churches would make fun of the sorcery and other mythological or anthropological practices, tribal practices, which were being used or practiced within the Negro churches. They would say that the African American churches are loud, too noisy. There are dances and music and mumbo jumbo, etc., etc. But whatever be the case, it was their own. And this is what DuBois emphasized. So the point I'm trying to make is this, and the point that DuBois was trying to emphasize was this, that they were looking for a cultural space of their own. And if we read the book, The Souls of Black Folk, then we see, very interestingly, the first chapter of that book is Our Spiritual Strivings. That is the name of the first chapter, the spiritual strivings. And if we read that chapter, then we'll see that DuBois is talking about the sorrow songs. We know about blues music, and other cultural practices of the African American community, and how being slaves, they articulated their traumatized experiences in those what DuBois described as the sorrow songs, and the spiritual expressions in terms of singing, verse writing, and also prayers and other forms of articulations. There is another chapter in the Souls of Black Folk itself, where we see that DuBois, as I said, that the very first chapter is called Of Our Spiritual Strivings, and that chapter narrates the importance of the spiritual space for the African American community, how they could galvanize themselves, how they could uplift themselves by identifying with that church space, the African American church, and how the African American church acted as I said, the savior, the benedictor, the consoler, the pacifier, and also the unifier, that the African American people will assemble there, will listen to the priest, and they will help each other. They will organize different events there. In fact, DuBois would not have been able to continue his studies had the African American church did not come forward to provide the scholarship. They, in fact, collected contributions from different members of the African American community and helped for the education of DuBois. His mother died at the very young age, so he was virtually orphan, and he was very talented, and his village people realized the talent that he had, and the churchmen, the African American church members in that area of Great Barrington, though some of those churches are still there even today, they came forward, collected a sum of money, and that helped for the continuation of DuBois' studies. So this is an example of how the African American church acted as a kind of a benedictor, savior, a community support system, and a space for organizing the African American people, how they could discuss, how they could assemble, they could mobilize, and they could think of uplifting themselves, etc. Even though, so this is how DuBois emphasized and justified the necessity of the Negro church, even though he said that some of the African American priests are not doing their roles or performing their roles the way they should be doing, but that's an aberration. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the church as an institution played a crucial role in the upliftment and in the emancipation of the African American community. I'll refer to another chapter from the book, The Souls of Black Folk, which is also a very important chapter, and the chapter is called Of the Faith of the Fathers. This is, the 10th chapter in The Souls of Black Folk, and happens to be one of the most important chapters. If we go to that chapter, then we see that DuBois also narrates, even in this particular chapter, the importance and the necessity of the African American church and how it is distinct from the conventional or mainstream Christian practices in America, which is followed by the white supremacists. In fact, DuBois even went to the extent of saying that even if Jesus comes to Atlanta today, he runs the risk of being lynched by the white supremacists. He went to the extent of saying this. So we can understand that even at that time of 1903, and we know that lynching was an usual practice at that time. There are so many cases of lynching, black lynching, tortures, and other forms of murders. The African Americans will be tied with a rope, and they will be tied with a truck or a jeep, and then with a horse, and then they will be dragged to the ground throughout the town, and then they will be hanged, they will be lynched, they will be killed, they will be burned. So many horrific incidents of lynching happened at that time. So this part of history of slavery and African American struggle. And within that context, we have to situate the importance of the African American church, how as an institution of spiritual practice and cultural space, it came forward and acted for for the betterment and for the organization of a whole community. Now, because of the paucity of time, I cannot go into further details of the Negro chart, but this is exactly what that particular text speaks and narrates. And I have worked on that, have written on that also. This is exactly what it narrates: the history, how it evolved, how it is different from white churches and other things, etc., etc. Now, having talked about DuBois and talked about the Negro church, let us now come to the Indian scenario, again, to keep alive the comparatist frame. The same is the case here, that Ambedkar died in the year 1956, and the Buddha and his Dhamma was published in 1957, just after his death. And this is not a fact that Ambedkar all of a sudden decided to write this particular text called the Buddha and his Dhamma. It has been brewing into his mind for a long time. In fact, if we look into the history of Ambedkar's journey towards conversion, when he converted to Buddhism, if we follow that journey, then we can understand that he has been thinking about it for a long time. In fact, he gave hints that he's going to convert to Buddhism. In fact, he on many occasions he said that I was born as a Dalit, but I'm not going to die as a Hindu. So this is a crucial statement. So we all know about the Mahat Satyagraha and other events. There are many other events. I'm not going into the details. All I'm trying to make you understand is this, that as the Negro church has a history, similarly, Buddha and his Dhamma also has a history. And as the Negro Church has a history that is connected to the bloody long history of slavery and dislocation, uprooting, disencourage, violence, massacres and all forms of genocides, etc. Similarly, the history of the Buddha and his Dhamma can be traced back to the thousands years of history of the caste system in India, and how the Buddha deviated from within the Hindu fold and opened a new branch called it the Buddhist following. Now, why did Ambedkar decide? As we know that I just narrated to you the rationale or the history of DuBois's writing the Negro Chart as part of that Atlanta annual conference. What about Ambedkar? Ambedkar wrote a very important essay in the Calcutta Mahabodhi Society Journal in the year 1951, and that was on Buddha and the future of his religion. This essay was very important in the sense that, according to Ambedkar, and he has written that in the preface of Buddha and his Dhamma itself, that after this essay was published, he got many phone calls, many requests from various corners that he should write a full book-length work on Buddhism itself. Now, what was the necessity of it? According to Ambedkar, none of the teachings of Buddha were documented by himself as a text. In fact, whatever we get about the Buddhist texts were all available through the oral representations of his disciples and followers. According to Ambedkar, that happens to be one of the tragedies of Buddhism, that it was not well documented and articulated in that organized form. Now, some can debate that that might be one of the redeeming features of Buddhism. Who knows? Had it been well documented, it would have been ossified into an organized, closed structure. Because it is not that well documented and not preserved in a particular text form, that's why the hermeneutical process of interpreting it, going for expositionary practices and interpretations are possible. In fact, the Buddha and his Dhamma has been described as a text which is an exposition and interpretation of the Buddha's gospel through the eyes of Ambedkar. In fact, in one of the interviews, Ambedkar said that my motto of life is equality, fraternity, and solidarity. But this I do not take from the French Revolution. My source of inspiration is the Buddha, because it is the Buddha who first talked about Karuna Maitri way back, much earlier than the French Revolution. So this is fascinating in the sense that the African Americans had a tribe in that way, had an ancestral, primordial cultural space of their own, which they practiced within the location of Africa. Then they were dislocated, and then they were forced to transplant and to remold their cultural practices within the structures of Christianity, which they remolded as Black Christianity. But for the Dalits, they were nowhere, in the sense that they were also looking for a religion of their own. In fact, this is what Ambedkar would say, that I cannot identify myself with the Hindu mythological gods and goddesses. If you read the preface of the Buddha and his Dhamma, then we see that Ambedkar narrates the root of his inspiration towards Buddhism. He was in his 4th standard. He passed his class 4 examination. And because Dalit students were not that well educated at that time, someone passing the 4th standard was a big event, and his villagers wanted to celebrate that moment. Ambedkar's father was not that enthusiastic about it, but some of the villagers persuaded him to do that. one of the writers, one of the Dalit writers, who was a wise and a educated person in that village, he presented a book on the Buddha to Ambedkar at that age. And Ambedkar was fascinated by that book, and he studied that. And his inspiration towards Buddhism can be located to that particular book. This is exactly what he has said. And after that, when he started reading the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which his father would force him to do, he revolted. And he said to his father that I cannot identify with Krishna or to Rama. You explain to me, why should I be reading it? Because they are pro-Brahminical. So how being a Dalit, I can do that? So Ambedkar's seed of revolt and rebellion and deviation from the Hindu fold was implanted even at the tender age, and he could understand the existence of an alternative, the possibility of an alternative from that tender age itself. So it's not a fact that Ambedkar decided to write the Buddha and his Dhamma, or he decided to convert to Buddhism all of a sudden, being disgruntled with Hinduism. It was brewing in his mind, and he was looking into that alternative history of religion and theology. One may recall here Wendy Donig's book, The Alternative History of Hinduism, here in this context. So, and we know that in those scholarly works, it is said that the Dalits were those who were actually the Buddhists who deviated from the Hindu fold, and then they were persecuted by various means. So, Ambedkar's argument that since we as Dalits are segregated because of the Chaturvarna system, the caste system, how can we identify and enfold ourselves within that system of oppression? So we have to look for a separate and an alternative fold with which we can begin anew. Which would be our own cultural space, and that space would be a space where there would be no structures of discrimination or oppression. And there, Ambedkar brilliantly differentiated between religion and Dhamma. And if you read Ambedkar's Buddha and his Dhamma, then you'll see that there is a chapter on religion and Dhamma, and how Ambedkar says that religion is something which is uh, exclusively related or concerned with the individual practice of religion, or organized religion, or institutional religion, or the personal faith, whereas Dhamma is social connectedness. And when Dhamma, when we talk about Dhamma, then we cannot talk about discrimination. We cannot entertain the two together. If we are practicing Dhamma, then it involves or it impinges on us to practice the ethos of altruism, karuna, maitri, love, a sense of equality, fraternity for everyone. And this is exactly what the Buddha practiced. And therefore, within the Buddhist structure, there is no distinction between the paribrajaka and the upasaka. The upasaka is the ordinary lay person who practices his religion or her religion within the house, whereas the paribrajaka is the committed one who has elevated himself to that deep core of religious asceticism, and who is liberated from the mundane requirements of life, etc., etc., who is a renunciator in that sense. If we compare, Ambedkar says that if we compare the paribrajaka with the Brahmin and the upashaka as the non-Brahmin, then within the Hindu system, there is a deep divide between the non-Brahmin and the Brahmin, whereas in the Buddhist system, the distinction between the paribrajaka and the upasaka is virtually nothing. There is virtually no distinction at all. So this is how, through different arguments, Ambedkar would argue that the Buddhist system of religion, which he described as Dhamma, is more what another important scholar Buddhism has described as engaged Buddhism, and the scholar is Christopher Quinn. Christopher Quinn has written on Ambedkar and Ambedkar's turn towards Buddhism, and he has described this kind of this kind of reinterpretation of Buddhism, or re-explanation of Buddhism, or rediscovery or revival of Buddhism as the engaged model of Buddhism, in which the Buddhist principles are connected and brought within the fold of social analysis, social necessity, social upliftment. This is a religious practice which is deeply saturated and deeply informed with spiritual endeavors and spiritual implorations. At the same time, it is horizontally enfolding each and every member of this society, enfolding everyone within the parameters of that spiritual practice, without alienating or discriminating anyone on the basis of either birth, on the basis of religious prerogative, on the basis of a particular elite position, etc. So Ambedkar's logic that if the modern man, the man of science, the man of logic and reason, is going to adopt a particular religion, then Buddhism is the only one. Now, some may debate on this. Definitely, there can be grounds of debate on that. I'm not going to that debate, but this is Ambedkar's understanding, and we have to understand that Ambedkar had limited choices at the time. He was exposed to the Hindu system and the structures of caste, and the alternative that he could think of because of his own training, his own studies. And this is what he said, in fact, in the preface, that my 25 years of studies of all the religions convinces me that if any religion is going to help us in this time of modern reason and logic, it is the religion of Buddhism. Now, we should not be reading this statement as a kind of a exclusionary statement on behalf of Ambedkar. What he's trying to argue here is this, that Buddhism is a religion which is not a religion at all. It is a social practice of fraternity. It is fraternizing each and every one, where Dhamma is basically premised on the principle of altruism, as I said, fraternity, solidarity, well-being, which is the basic and fundamental requirement for our survival together. So you can understand the similarities between the two texts that I brought for the discussion today. The Negro Church, which was occasioned by the necessity to look for a social analysis of the position and place of religion in a community which is deeply tortured, discriminated, alienated, and violated, dislocated by the system of slavery. And this particular text in India, which was also emerging as an answer, questing for an alternative that would challenge the supremacy of the Brahminical stranglehold of the caste system. So both the texts had their origins to this quest for an alternative and a liberated horizon, a space of spiritual striving, a space for spiritual articulation, which is a liberated space, which is also allowing them that sense of equality, that sense of citizenship, that sense of enfoldment. And that is how these two texts can be brought together on a single table, sharing the same history of discrimination and violence, and how both talked about the importance of reinterpreting a religion in terms of social need. In fact, if you read the critical edition of the Buddha and his Dhamma, then you'll see that Rathore and Verma has quoted various scholars who have even, in fact, underestimated the importance of the Buddha and his Dhamma. They have said that, oh, this is not a book connected to Buddhism. This is not at all connected to Buddhism. This is, in fact, Ambedkar's own interpretation of Buddhism. This is, in fact, a political interpretation of the Buddhist religion. Now, Rathore and Verma would say that, so what? If it is a political interpretation of Buddhism, that so be the case, because Buddhism is providing that platform for the Dalits to raise their voice, to get that sense of affinity, to get that sense of well-being and sense of belongingness, which Hinduism, or Brahminical Hinduism to be more precise, has denied them. And similar is the case with the African American Church or the Negro Church, that they were not allowed to enter into the white supremacist church. They were not given any space. They were not even given any sense of citizenship. They were treated as non-citizens. They were even treated as beasts. They were treated as subhumans or non-humans. And therefore, in that zone of trauma and neglect and humiliation and torture, the African American Church provided them that silent, dark space of consolation, where they could, assemble, can express, can cry out and articulate their sorrow songs. So this is the platform that both of them are talking about, and this is where they are expressing their argument about the importance that that religion played in organizing both these communities. And this is where we bring in this idea of liberation theology, as I used in the title itself, which is absolutely based on concepts of new interpretation, heterodoxy, not orthodoxy. Buddha and his Dhamma is not orthodox Buddhism. In fact, this is a new interpretation of Buddhism, or what Ambedkar called the Navayana Buddhist understanding of Buddhism. So it is not the Hinayana or the Mahayana or the Vajrayana. It's a new yana, a new vehicle of understanding Buddhism for the social necessity of upliftment. And this is the interpretation of Ambedkar. In fact, some scholars describe the Buddha and his Dhamma as the Buddhist Bible. Now, I don't like this expression much, because this is again another attempt to reduce the vast and enormous universe of Buddhist philosophy within the closures of a particular text. But Ambedkar time and again repeatedly said within the text that he wrote that particular book for the common people, for the layman. And when he converted to Buddhism, he took a vow. And if you read those vows, then you'll see that there are many vows that he adopted when he converted to Buddhism. And some of them were quite controversial and challenging. And it is easy to understand that why mainstream Hindu society were angry with that, because Ambedkar openly said that we're not going to listen to the words of Rama and Krishna, not going to believe in those gods and goddesses. We're going to believe in Buddha and his principles of peace, love, karuna, maitri, etc., etc. So the debate continues that whether Buddha and his Dhamma is really a text that reflects the original Gospels of the Buddha, or whether it is a reinterpretation of Buddhist philosophy within the perception of Ambedkarian political philosophy of social emancipation and caste annihilation, and whether DuBois's idea of the Negro Church can be studied as a model of Christianity, or as a completely new alternative understanding of Christianity, where the Christian Gospels of brotherhood, the Christian Gospels of love, the Christian Gospels of fraternity were actualized through a new model of the Black Church. And it is interesting that most of the Black churches are affiliated to the Baptist, or to the Methodist, or to the Episcopal configurations of Christianity. So there are many brotherhoods, and Let thousand flowers bloom. Let there be plural ways of looking into different structures of faith, and as long as it helps society to grow, to live together, and help us to thrive and to prosper. So that's why the liberation theological model or radical political theology, as enunciated by DuBois's Negro Church or Ambedkar's Buddha and his Dhamma, where religion is viewed as a tool of social emancipation, not as a tool of social division, the kind of thing that we are witnessing today. So these people, scholars like DuBois, scholars like Ambedkar, activists like DuBois, activists like Ambedkar, were more responsible. They realized and recognized and identified the importance of the place of religion, the importance that religion holds in the lives of people. They recognized that, they identified that. Having done that, they thought about how to build an alternative religious space which will bring people together, which will bring a message of peace and brotherhood instead of dividing us further. So that is the model of radical political theology or liberation theology, where theological practices, existing or pre-existing theological practices, are appropriated or used for political emancipation, social emancipation, as a kind of a human religion. In fact, DuBois wrote a text called Credo, My Credo, where if you read, it's wonderfully written, where he talks about the brotherhood of the universe. He's not talking just about the African Americans, he's talking about each and every individual in this world. Ambedkar is saying the same thing. He says, my concept of Buddhism is not a religion the way we understand it. It's a religion for humanity. It's a religion for everyone. So that is how fascinatingly both these two texts come together as a tool for social upliftment. And I'll just end and conclude by referring to two important critical thinkers of our time. One is Slavoj Zizek, and the other one is Alain Badiou. Both of them have written two books individually on Saint Paul. Paul's letters to his disciples, and how Paul interpreted Jesus and Christianity and Jesus's gospels for social regeneration has been discussed by both Zizek and Badiou. And today, when Western scholars are talking about radical political theology, they're referring to these two works scripted by these two leading thinkers. Another book, The Monstrosity of God by Kristen David. Kristen Davis, most probably, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. They have also written about this practice of looking into religion as a tool for social reform, and we can go on and talk about many other examples. We can even talk about Kabir, we can talk about Chaitanya, we can talk about many other figures who use the Bhakti movement in our country, in other countries, similar movements took place. So this is where the history of liberation theology comes within this space of social regeneration and reform, and how we can think of it as a tool to perform that. So that's it. I hope I could do justice to the subject itself. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for this illuminating and interesting talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. We actually learned a lot from your talk, and there's a lot to know about this area. For me also, and I think for many others also, it's a very new area of expertise. And thank you for saying so much on this and like throwing light on this area. And sir, if you are ready, then we can go to the question answer session now, and we can take questions or comments from our viewers or participants.
Sure, you can.
Yes, Kingshuk, will you show if there are any? I think I saw many comments in the YouTube chat box. If there are any questions, or maybe you can show the comments also. There's a comment from Richa Biswas.
Yes, it's visible, right?
Yes, I think second visitors.
Okay. No, you please read out, Aratika. Read out the comment.
Yeah, Richa is saying very insightful and interesting facts to know and engage further in the domain of DuBois and Ambedkar studies. Thank you so much for such a brilliant lecture session. Absolutely, sir. This 43rd lecture of Calcutta Comparatists, you have just gave it a new level. You just take it to a new level. Thank you so much, sir. And Seema Ahmed is saying, thanks to the speaker for his brilliant thoughts on two stalwarts of social change who guided the trodden not only in past but still continues to inspire. Yes, Seema, absolutely. And I think there are many more comments as well.
Yes, Protein has a question.
Yes,
Actually,
please.
there are many parts of it. Wait, I'm making them visible.
Yes, sure,
This is
sure.
the first
I'll
part
read
of
out
the.
to you. Firstly, Protim is congratulating sir for such an illuminating talk. Protim's question is that I have one question, rather a query to ask. In the souls of black folk, DuBois, I can see DuBois is critical to the Christianity or the passivity of Christian doctrine.
Should I
He,
answer it now?
Kingshuk, is this the
Right.
second part of the question?
Yes, this is the second part.
Sir, should I read out the second part?
Word limit in this live chat section comments.
Yes, yes,
That's what
yes, there's a word limit. Yeah,
trying to
absolutely.
mention several parts actually. So this is the
Yeah,
second part.
okay. Kingshuk, will you mind repeating the first part once again so that I can,
Yes,
there is
yes,
no
yes.
break. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
This is the first part.
Yes, sir, I'm reading out to you. I have one question or rather query. In the souls of black folk, DuBois, I can say DuBois is critical to the Christianity or the passivity of Christian doctrine. He judged his principles, even his idea of religious rebirth for black people, an idea of liberation influenced Ambedkar during his college days in America. But I found Ambedkar's take on Dhamma and his vision of new social order or the form of social liberalism quite unique or different than Du Bois. I mean, he sort of translated spiritual practice
And
into his
this is the
own
last part.
version of into his own version of Buddhism, which is Navayana Buddhism. But Du Bois didn't do anything like that. I'd like to ask, where do you think Ambedkar and Du Bois are parted or they were divided? Sir, if you'd like to answer or comment.
Yes. I think this is a good question, and but to answer this, uh, we need to go beyond the frame of these two texts, and I don't think time will permit me to do that at this moment. But this much should be said, Pratim. But thank you for this question. This is a good one. You are right to detect that there is a slight difference between uh, the Negro Church and the Buddha and his Dhamma, because as I said during the talk, that while Du Bois is recasting African American, uh, what should I say, community religious practices within the mold of Christianity, because they had no other choice. They could not practice anything else within the American soil. That would simply not be allowed to do. Please try to understand that. It was not possible for the African American slaves to practice something like the Buddhist religion or Islamic religion. It is interesting to see that as they moved on later and subsequently, some of the African American leaders, the Black Panthers, for example, or others later, they adopted or they even enfolded Islam. Buddhism also became quite popular in America during the time of the Beat generation. Remember, um, poets like Ginsberg and others, they were all fascinated by Buddhism. But the historic time that we are talking about, our late 19th century, early 19th century, mid 19th century, early 20th century. At that time, it was not possible for them to think of an alternative religion. So what they could do, they had no other choices left within them. The only choice that they had and they could entertain was how to cleverly and intelligently remold and recast and transplant their own religious community practices, their own ritual. Even today, if you go to America and enter a church, which is an African American church, you will immediately see the difference in the rituals that they perform there in their churches and the rituals performed in the white churches. So, as I said, that even architecturally, ritualistically, ideologically, and in all other aspects, it is different. Now, having said that, you must also remember and must understand that DuBois was out and out a communist. In fact, the American government confiscated his passport because he was charged for being a communist. This is a funny thing, but at that time, being a communist in America was a crime. So he was called a conspirator, an anti-American, and many of us would be fascinated to know that what is known as the Bandung Conference, which was also attended by Jawaharlal Nehru, Ho Chi Minh, and many other leaders from the Middle East. Dubois was also one of the invited guest speakers in the Bandung Conference because he was instrumental for another important movement called the Pan-African movement, which is another area that post-colonial scholars uh, do not look that regularly. Post-colonial scholars would be talking about diaspora, would be talking about this and that, would be talking about dislocation, belonging, but they have forgotten that a fascinating chapter of Pan-Africanism, and Dubois happens to be one of the founding fathers of the Pan-African movement. Now, Dubois's uh, 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 passport was confiscated by the American government, and he couldn't travel to the London conference. Then you'll be surprised to know that Dubois lived his entire life in America, and then he died in Ghana. His grave is not in America, but his grave is in Ghana. He spent the last days of his life in Ghana because he changed his citizenship. The American government persecuted him so much for his communist link that he was forced to change his citizenship. He just abandoned his American citizenship and adopted a new citizenship at the age of 92, the Ghanaian citizenship. And I had the fortune to talk to Professor Gayatri Srivak because she visited the University of Ghana where the Dubois archive is located. And Gayatri told me that Ghana is not that rich. Ghana is a poor country and they do not have that resources to preserve the Dubois archive in a proper way. It's in a pretty bad shape. But most of the original writings and original books of Dubois are still kept there. Now, why I'm narrating all these things? To answer your question, that Dubois was an agnostic. Many scholars would say that Dubois was an agnostic. He was a communist. He didn't have that much of faith in religion, which is not completely correct. Because if you go into archival materials, you'll see that he was in touch with many of those African American religious organizations. So what I'm trying to mean is Dubois was also looking for a social recasting of the existing religious practices. It's the fact that for him, Buddhism was not an available template at that time, so he could not think of it. For Ambedkar, that template was already available. So in that way, I would say that to be fair to Dubois, it was simply not possible for him to think of a completely new religion. But he was not that religiously minded, to be more precise, as Ambedkar was. But then some may say that even Ambedkar was also thinking of Buddhism as a tool, as a kind of a platform to think of a launching pad or a vantage point to raise his battle against Brahminical Hinduism. So in that way, your question is partly correct, but partly perhaps not doing justice to Du Bois.
Arthika, are
Yeah,
you there?
yeah. There is
Yes.
another question.
This is the next comment by Mursad Alam sir.
Should I read it out?
Yeah, I got the yes, I can see the question of Murshid.
Okay,
The
sir.
question is Ambedkar left Brahmanical Hinduism to escape the oppressive structures. DuBois focuses on reappropriation of Christianity. Well, I think the same answer would be the answer would be the same that I just said to Pratim, that it was not possible. I mean, historically speaking, it would be wrong on our part to suggest it would be magical and it would be absolutely unrealistic to imagine Du Bois thinking of a completely new religious practice or a religious template at that time. It was, historically speaking, it was simply not possible at that time. It was slowly making his presence felt, and that's why, as I said, Du Bois would say that my religion is communism. In fact, he said that in some of the occasions. He was not that deeply religious person, although his books are inscribed in religion. Look at the name of the book, The Souls of Black Folk. So in fact, there is a book called The Souls of W.E.B. Du Bois. There are scholars who have looked into the religious faith structure of Du Bois. So there are studies on that. But my understanding would be that Du Bois was not looking for an alternative religion. It was not possible for him to do that. It was not desirable also. In fact, the only way they could have done this was to re-establish the African modes of religious practices, which was perhaps not possible. The Rastafarian movement that took place later in America by figures like Bob Marley, you may remember, those things were attempted, and then later others like Malcolm X and then the Muhammad Ali, for example, the boxer, they moved to Islam, but that was possible historically at that particular chunk of time. But given the kind of historical juncture that Du Bois was working, historically speaking, it was the rise of the October Revolution, 1917. So Russia was ascendant, and the Russian Revolution inspired Du Bois. So he was more drawn towards the communist movement rather to any other religious practices. He was out and out a communist, but he didn't abandon the fundamental basic humanitarian ethos of Christianity.
Thank you, sir. There is another question by Bhakta Ram Sahu. Sir, my question is, don't you think that many of the present scholars, as well as the past, used religious belief for their own sake? Secondly, if so, how will someone take anyone's view seriously?
Okay, if I could get your question properly, Bhakta, you are perhaps suggesting that this is a common practice and therefore there is nothing special about it. This is exactly what I said, that Chaitanya did it, the Bhakti movement did it, even Kabir did it. If you read Ambedkar's preface to the Buddha and his Dhamma, Ambedkar said that his father was a Kabir Panthi. This is the word that Ambedkar has used. Ramananda Panthi. You know that within the Dalit communities, there are many followings of different cults and sects. Look, the basic point is that all these great social thinkers are suggesting and accepting the importance of religion as a social practice. They're not doing away with religion. They're not saying that, well, religion is something which is to be confined within the individual locale of personal house and personal faith. They are saying that religion is there. So you have to accept the place of religion in our life. All they are suggesting is that given the fact that religion is there, religion is important, and for people, religion is important, how do we use the religious space for social reform and social regeneration and social cohesion rather than social confrontation. This is the basic point. Religion has led to the crusade, to different forms of bloodshed, but the argument for these thinkers would be that how to accept religion as an important space within the social scenario. That said, how to use it for social cohesion and fraternity rather than for confrontation and division. Because Brahminical Hinduism divided society, whereas Buddhism, the version of Buddhism that Ambedkar is hinting at, in fact, it's like old wine in a new bottle. I agree, but this new hermeneutical process is necessary even today, isn't it? I just refer to it. Even today we are debating this question, even today in 2020, that what should be the role of religion. Should it be dividing people? Should we be allowing people to be lynched on broad daylight on open street in the name of religion? Should we be forcing someone his or her eating habit? Should we be forcing someone to think whether he should marry a particular person of a particular religion, etc., etc.? You have terms like love jihad, blah blah blah, and various other things. So I mean, we are still battling with this question, that the religious question is bound to be there because integrally connected with our social space. But how to negotiate with that socially, culturally, for the greater cohesion and coexistence of everyone? That's the point. And how we interpret the religious line on that basic fundamental question, that's the point. This is where we need to revisit these thinkers.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your comments. Sir, I think we have another comment from Shubhendra Bhomik. Thanks, Anindo. Perhaps religion is not so important that one should reject it while it promises for some good social usage. Religion for both Ambedkar and DuBois is perhaps a political matter. Sir, if you'd like to comment on this.
Yes, thanks, Uvendra, for the question. This is again also an important one. In fact, Rathore and Verma, they have raised this exact point in their introduction to the critical edition of the Buddha and his Dhamma. And I must also say that I should acknowledge my gratitude and gratefulness to Subhendra, the question maker himself, my friend Subhendra Bhomik, because I got the book from him. And if we read the critical introduction, they have exactly raised this point, and they would say that this division of the religious and the political, and the religious and the personal and the political, would be an elite distinction because they are integrally connected. They cannot be disentangled from each other. In fact, they would say that it is very much there, and politics cannot be dissociated from the question of religion or culture. So whatever political frame that we are talking about, Ambedkar would say that it is already there. We are already embedded within the religious space, whether we accept it or not. How to negotiate with that? So they are not in favor of dissociating or disentangling religion from the question of politics itself. They would say that they're not separate. In fact, they are integrally connected to each other. The question is how to, because we are already inscribed and embedded within the caste system. So politically, so religion has already been politicized by the caste system. Now, how can we say that we are thinking of religion in a political way? Because already when we say that the Chaturvarna system is, according to the scriptures, the best system, Manu is suggesting the Chaturvarna, this is, and that is religiously practiced and accepted, then that's a political format being given a theological sanction. And that has to be challenged politically, and that has to be challenged through the line of religion itself, because the moment we politically question it, we are actually also politically questioning the very theological premise of it.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable comments. I don't think we have any more questions now, but maybe we have some comments.
Yes, I
Kinshuk was
actually
just going a comment, I think.
made the comments visible. The last comments were like from Shoptoponi Pondit. Thank you so much for the for this insightful talk. And then Bhaktram Sahu again writes, "Thank you so much, sir. I'm listening to you after 9 years."
Also, Pratim is with us now. Pratim, will you like to say something to sir? Maybe discuss something or a comment if you want.
No, I don't have anything much to say. But as well as I was seeing Shubhendru Bhaumik's comment, and one thing if I mean not wrong, I think Ambedkar's preface, which is about, on his Buddha and his Dharma, Ambedkar also is suggesting in his last line that one should read. About as well as Buddhism. There's he's suggesting about another book which will write very soon, which is Buddha or Karl Marx, if I am not wrong. So I think both Ambedkar is also concerned about the uh, act of the politics and the Marxist influences about it. Though I'm not I haven't read it already. So I was thinking that perhaps DuBois, the Marxist or the leftist, whatever side is saying today, perhaps that route is also can be evident in Ambedkar, if I am not wrong. So I like to ask, sir, is it just a valid point that both they are sort of inclined or sort of have some sort of influence by Karl Marx or the Marxist or the leftist, whatever that thinking was. So, sir, if you are here, you can. I would like to know your views that if they are both influenced by the Marx and the leftist attitude.
Yes. If I I I could just the overall I could get the overall sense of your question, Pratim, because your voice was breaking. I missed some of the part, but whatever I could gather, if I'm not mistaken, you were suggesting that I could hear that you mentioned to that text by Ambedkar on the Buddha and Karl Marx. You were right there. But in the context of the Buddha and his Dhamma, Ambedkar also said that the coming days, the future, is in the future there will be a conflict between the Buddha and Karl Marx. So this is also quite interesting, and I'm not suggesting that Ambedkar does not share the egalitarian principles of Marx. But if we read the annihilation of caste, and here I would bring that to the discussion table, because the point that you are hinting at is the shared horizon of sympathy between Ambedkar and DuBois for the Marxist principle. I partly agree with you that both of them were endorsing and going for that egalitarian principle of society, not denying that. But if we read the annihilation of caste, there we see that Ambedkar specifically singles out the socialists of India and would say that they have for a long time talked only about the economic, emancipation of society, overlooking the immediate social concerns. One of the reasons that Indian Marxists for a long time ignored the caste factor, they would continue saying that class is the only caste. So that was one of the problems of the Marxist line. That the mainstream canonical official Marxist line. I'm not saying all Marxists would say that, and it would be wrong to club all Marxian views under one umbrella. We cannot homogenize in that. There are multiple versions of it. But I partly agree again that there is no denying that Ambedkar was also for that egalitarian principle of everyone getting the same freedom and equality. But he was more concerned with the immediate social forms of division, which Marxists are talking about the economic mode of production, the political economy of production, whereas Ambedkar would be talking more about the political economy of social division. So that's it. I mean, in that way, we can. It's a division. Not remember his famous statement: caste is not just a division of labor; it's a division of laborers. That's it. That's it.
Thank you so much. I think my voice is not breaking anymore. I think we don't have any other comments or any questions to ask. Now I would probably.
Yes, yes. The last comment was from Shubhendra Bhomik. Yes, Anindya, thank you very much. He
Okay.
said.
Now I would like to request our convener Aratrika Ganguly to express formal vote of thanks.
Okay.
We have some. Yes.
There is another question.
Yes, sure.
Yes, it's again from Shubhendra Bhomik, sir. I'm reading it out. Marxism somehow does not rule out violence entirely, but Buddhism does. Maybe this can be related to why should oppressed would oppress in their turn?
Yeah, that's a great statement. Thank. I agree.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Aratrika,
Yes, yes. Thank you, Pratim. Thank you, sir. Thank you for this wonderful lecture for this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you very much again. And thanks to all our members and our viewers and participants for joining us today and for your valuable comments and questions. Please join us on our next lecture. We'll be posting about it more on our WhatsApp, Facebook, and other social media handles. And don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel and follow our website for more details. And once again, thank you, Dr. Purakayastha, for joining us today. You just made it wonderful. A wonder just made our evening so wonderful. Thank you, sir. And a very good night to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So I thank all of you, everyone, Jemima, Aratrika, Kingshuk, and Pratim, and all the other members of Calcutta Comparatists for organizing this and for the invitation. Thank you.
Our immense pleasure, sir. Thank you.
A pleasure,
Pleasure
sir.
is all ours. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.
Good
Bye,
night,
sir.
sir.
Bye. Good night, sir.
Inshu, can you probably?
Yes, we can end the live now. Good night to all our viewers.